Assassin's Creed, the game that made revolution your religion. Between 2007 and 2012, Assassin's Creed became a cultural phenomenon. Millions of players stepped into the Animus, relived genetic memories, and learned that history was a lie. They discovered that every major historical event, the Crusades, the Renaissance, the American Revolution, was secretly orchestrated by two ancient orders locked in eternal conflict: the assassins fighting for freedom, the Templars fighting for control. But here's what nobody talks about. Assassin's Creed isn't just teaching you alternative history, it's forming you in a religious worldview. It's training you to see all authority as conspiracy, all structure as oppression, and absolute personal autonomy as the highest good. It's revolutionary Gnosticism dressed up as historical fiction, and it's one of the most effective pieces of anti-Christian formation ever created. The game explicitly presents a creation myth where humanity was engineered as a slave race by ancient gods, where religion is technological mind control, where the biblical story is a corrupted memory of alien intervention, and where salvation comes through rebellion against authority and the worship of human will. By the time you finish the Ezio trilogy, you've absorbed a complete theological framework, and you did it while having fun, while feeling like a hero, while learning history. You've been taught what to think about God, about freedom, about rebellion, about truth itself. And you never noticed because you were too busy climbing buildings and stabbing Templars. Entertainment is never neutral. Games teach theology, and Assassin's Creed teaches the oldest lie: you shall be as gods. Subscribe right now, click like, and hit the notification bell to make sure you never miss a video. The first Assassin's Creed opens with you as Desmond Miles, a bartender kidnapped by Abstergo Industries in 2012. They strap you into the Animus, a machine that reads genetic memory encoded in your DNA and lets you relive your ancestors' lives as if they were your own. Abstergo claims they're doing genetic research. But they're lying. Abstergo is a front for the Knights Templar, and the Templars aren't a medieval religious order that dissolved centuries ago. They're a secret society that's been manipulating world events since before recorded history. They've infiltrated every government, every corporation, every major institution, and they do it all for one purpose: to bring humanity under their absolute control. Their tool? The pieces of Eden, ancient artifacts of immense power, apples, staves, swords, shrouds left behind by those who came before, the Isu, a precursor race that created humanity as a slave species, then died in a cataclysm, leaving their technology scattered across the earth. The Apple of Eden literally controls minds. Whoever possesses it can make entire populations see illusions, obey commands, worship them as gods. Every major religion, every prophet, every miracle, all of it was just ISU technology in the hands of the informed. Moses parting the Red Sea, Apple of Eden. Jesus performing miracles, Piece of Eden. The Templars know this. They've known for centuries. And they've been hunting these artifacts to complete their ancient mission: use ISU technology to control all of humanity. The assassins oppose them. An equally ancient order dedicated to free will, fighting to keep the pieces of Eden out of Templar hands and preserve human freedom no matter the cost. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. That's their creed. And you, Desmond Miles, carry the genetic memory of the greatest assassins who ever lived: Altair ibn Lahad, who fought the Templars during the Crusades; Ezio Auditore da Firenze, who dismantled the Templar conspiracy in Renaissance Italy; Connor Kenway, who shaped the American Revolution. Their skills, their knowledge, their memories are locked in your DNA. Abstergo puts you in the Animus to find the pieces of Eden, but in doing so, they're training you. You're becoming an assassin. And eventually, you'll use those skills against the Templars in the modern day. The game takes real history, real organizations, real conspiracies, and weaves them into a narrative that makes you question everything. Were the Templars really dissolved? Did the Borgias really fall from power? Was the American Revolution really about liberty, or was it one faction of Templars overthrowing another? You're not reading about the assassins. You are them. You inhabit their bodies, make their choices, kill their enemies. and this creates identification. When Ezio fights the Templars, you feel like you're fighting the Templars. When Altair questions the Creed, you feel like you're questioning authority. The game is training you to see the world through assassin eyes, to recognize conspiracy, to distrust institutions, to view freedom as the highest good and control as the ultimate evil. But Assassin's Creed isn't just conspiracy fiction. At its core, it's presenting a complete creation myth, one that directly inverts and replaces the biblical narrative. Here's what the game reveals. Millions of years ago, the Isu ruled the earth, an advanced race with extraordinary lifespans, technological mastery, and psychic abilities. They created humans through genetic engineering, breeding us as a slave race to build their cities and serve their needs. But the Isu built a control mechanism into human DNA, susceptibility to the pieces of Eden, artifacts that emit specific frequencies causing humans to hallucinate, obey commands, and worship their masters as gods. We were literally designed to be controlled. Free will was bred out of us. Then two things happened. First, a hybrid emerged, a human Isu offspring who possessed both creativity and resistance to mind control. This hybrid bred with other humans, spreading diluted Isu DNA and partial resistance through the bloodline. Second, a solar catastrophe wiped out most of the Isu. Their civilization collapsed, humanity survived and multiplied, but scattered Isu technology remained, now worshipped by humans as divine artifacts. And the memory of the Isu became distorted into myths of gods who created humanity. This is where the game gets explicitly theological. It claims that every creation myth, every religious tradition, every prophet and god is a corrupted memory of the Isu. The Garden of Eden? Real place. The Tree of Knowledge? An apple of Eden that granted humans awareness of their enslavement? The serpent who tempted Eve? Not Satan, but a metaphor for the hybrid bloodline that freed humans from Isu control. Adam and Eve weren't the first humans. They were the first freed humans, the first rebels, the first assassins. God the Creator, a misremembered Isu, Yahweh, Jupiter, Zeus, all Isu, worshipped as gods by humans who didn't understand technology. Moses parting the Red Sea, using an apple. Jesus walking on water, healing the sick, pieces of Eden. Even sin is reframed. In the game's mythology, humanity's fall wasn't disobedience to God, it was breaking free from Isu slavery. Eating from the tree of knowledge wasn't sin, it was liberation. The serpent wasn't the deceiver, he was the liberator. And God wasn't the loving creator, he was the demiurge, the false god, the slaveholder demanding obedience. This is pure Gnosticism. Gnosticism was an early heresy that infected the church in the 1st and 2nd centuries. It taught that the material world was created by an evil or ignorant deity, the demiurge who trapped divine sparks, human souls, in physical bodies. The true God was distant and unknowable, and salvation came through secret knowledge, gnosis, that revealed your divine nature and freed you from the demiurge's control. In Gnostic texts, the serpent in Eden is a hero. He brings knowledge to humanity. He reveals that Yahweh is actually the demiurge, a petty, jealous, controlling false god who wants to keep humans ignorant. The real God wouldn't forbid knowledge. He wouldn't demand obedience. Sound familiar? Assassin's Creed is retelling the Gnostic creation myth with a science fiction veneer. The Isu are the demiurge. The pieces of Eden are the tools of control. Religion is the prison. And the assassins, those with the hybrid bloodline, those who resist mind control, are the enlightened ones who possess gnosis and fight to free humanity. But here's what's critical to understand. This is a deliberate misrepresentation of the biblical God. The God of Scripture is not the demiurge. He's not a controlling tyrant who demands ignorance. When God tells Adam not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he's not withholding knowledge to keep humans enslaved. He's establishing a boundary that defines the relationship. I am God, you are creature. I define good and evil, not you. Trust me, obey me, and you'll flourish. Adam and Eve were already free. They had dominion over creation. They walked with God. They had meaningful work, relationship, purpose. The one prohibition wasn't oppression, it was the foundation of covenant. When they ate the fruit, they weren't liberating themselves. They were believing a lie. You shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Genesis 3. They rejected God's authority to define truth and claimed that authority for themselves. And the result wasn't freedom, it was slavery. Slavery to sin, to death, to corruption. They became enslaved to their own rebellious nature. The serpent wasn't the liberator, he was the deceiver. He wasn't giving humans knowledge, he was giving them pride. The belief that they could be autonomous, that they could define reality, that they didn't need God. This is Satan's rebellion in Eden, convincing humanity to worship themselves instead of their creator. And every Gnostic system, every revolutionary ideology, every break your chains narrative that positions God as the enemy is just retelling Satan's lie with new aesthetics. And here's what you need to understand. The entertainment industry systematically patterns audiences in this inversion, recycling the same ancient pagan narratives that the principalities and powers have always used. Assassin's Creed isn't an outlier, it's the pattern. Look at the Matrix. The architect keeps humans asleep in pods, feeding them false reality. Neo fights the system. The film is explicitly Gnostic humans enslaved by false gods, liberation through secret knowledge. Look at his dark materials. The church is evil. God, called the authority, is a senile tyrant. The hero's quest is to kill God and establish a republic of heaven, where humans rule themselves. Look at the Truman Show. Christof, is the director who controls Truman's entire life from above. Salvation comes when Truman rebels and walks through the exit door into self-determined freedom. Notice the pattern? The creator is the villain. The authority figure is the oppressor. Rebellion is heroism. Freedom means rejecting any external claim to truth or authority. This isn't accidental. This is how spiritual deception works. The same rebellious principalities that inspired ancient Gnosticism, Babylonian myths, and pagan religious systems continue to work through cultural narratives today. The Apostle Paul warns that what pagan sacrifice they offer to demons' pagan religions aren't neutral, they're demonic counterfeits. And the same spiritual patterns that produce those ancient lies now manifest in modern entertainment. The entertainment industry, whether individual creators realize it or not, functions as a vehicle for these ancient deceptions. Writers and developers may be sincere, even talented, but they're working within narrative traditions that carry forward the same lies the serpent told in Eden. The spiritual genealogy is unmistakable. Gnostic texts inverted the biblical story, pagan myths made the creator the enemy, and now modern entertainment recycles these same patterns with stunning visual effects and compelling gameplay. You watch The Matrix, you root for Neo to break free from the architect. You play Assassin's Creed, you root for humanity to break free from the ISU. And subtly, unconsciously, you're being formed. Creators are tyrants, authority is oppression, submission is slavery, rebellion is virtue. So when you encounter the biblical God who created you, who has authority over you, who is worthy of obedience, your trained instinct is to see him as the demiurge, as the architect, as the Isu, as the enemy of human freedom. This is spiritual warfare, masquerading as entertainment. And while human creators may not intend this outcome, they're participating in patterns of deception that the principalities have been perfecting for millennia. Because here's what Gnosticism and every revolutionary ideology obscures. Rebellion against God isn't liberation, it's slavery. Satan's rebellion wasn't about freedom, it was about pride. Isaiah 14 records it. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, above the stars of God I will set my throne, I will make myself like the Most High. Satan didn't want freedom from tyranny. He wanted to be the tyrant. He wanted to be worshipped. He wanted God's throne. And when he couldn't overthrow God, he turned to humanity and offered us the same lie. You can be like God. You don't need him. You can define truth for yourself. Every revolutionary ideology since Eden has been Satan's rebellion repackaged. Throw off your chains. Reject authority. You are your own God. It sounds like freedom, but it's the original slavery. Slavery to pride, to self-worship, to the delusion that you can create meaning without the God who made you. The entertainment industry is saturated with this narrative because it's the story the principalities want you to believe. That God is the problem. That authority is oppression. That true freedom means total autonomy. But biblical freedom is the opposite. Jesus says, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Freedom comes through submission to truth, through recognizing who God actually is, not a tyrant, but a loving father, not a slaveholder, but a redeemer. The lie is that you have to choose between God and freedom. The truth is that rejecting God is slavery and submitting to Him is freedom, because He's the one who defines what freedom actually is. Assassin's Creed inverts this completely. It presents the Isu creator figures as slaveholders and humanity's rebellion as liberation. It makes the serpent the hero. It turns the fall into the ascent. And it does it so smoothly, with such gorgeous historical settings and satisfying gameplay, that millions absorb this theology without even noticing. Just as ancient Gnosticism distorted the early church's view of God, presenting him as an evil demiurge when scripture reveals him as loving father, modern entertainment continues recycling these same ancient lies, training you to see your creator as your enemy and Satan's rebellion as the path to freedom. Now, here's what makes Assassin's Creed even more disturbing from a biblical perspective. You're not just playing as humans fighting for freedom, you're playing as descendants of those who embraced disobedience to God, and the game makes this aspirational. In the game's lore, the Isu created humans as slaves with no free will, completely susceptible to the pieces of Eden. But then, Isu DNA mixed with human DNA. A hybrid bloodline emerged that possessed both human creativity and partial resistance to mind control. This bloodline could interact with pieces of Eden without being enslaved. Desmond Miles has this bloodline, Altair had it, Ezio had it, Connor had it. Every assassin you play as is a descendant of Isu human hybrids. That's why they can use the Animus. The machine specifically reads the genetic memory encoded in Isu DNA. That's why they can activate pieces of Eden. That's why they have eagle vision, a sixth sense that lets them see through walls, identify targets, perceive hidden messages. They're not baseline humans, they're something more than human. They're the offspring of divine beings and human women. This directly parallels Genesis 6. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The early church fathers held different views on this passage. Some, like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian, understood sons of God as fallen angels who had relations with human women, producing the Nephilim hybrid offspring. This reading was common in the first few centuries and appears in the Book of Enoch, which was influential in early Christianity. Others, like Julius Africanus, John Chrysostom, and Augustine, interpreted sons of God as the godly line of Seth and daughters of men as the ungodly line of Cain, a spiritual corruption through forbidden intermarriage rather than literal genetic mixing. But here's what's critical. Both readings describe disobedience to God and corruption of His created order. In the angelic interpretation, rebellious spiritual beings violated the boundaries God established between the angelic and human realms. The offspring, Nephilim, represented genetic and spiritual abomination creatures that shouldn't exist, born from rebellion against God's design. In the Sethite interpretation, the godly lineage that was supposed to remain separate and preserve faithfulness to God instead, saw that the daughters of men were attractive and chose based on lust and worldly desire rather than obedience to God's covenant. This spiritual apostasy led to the corruption that provoked God's judgment. Either way, The text immediately follows with, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and God sent the flood." The Nephilim, or the offspring of this forbidden union, were destroyed because they represented rebellion against God's order. Numbers 13 mentions Nephilim giants still existing in Canaan after the flood, and when Israel conquers Canaan, they're commanded to destroy them. These weren't heroes, they were enemies of God's purposes, products of disobedience that needed to be removed. And this is exactly what Assassin's Creed presents, just with different names, the Isu divine beings bred with humans. The offspring were mighty men of renown, heroes, warriors, legends. The assassins are the descendants of this bloodline. When you play as Ezio, as Altair, as Connor, you're not playing as a normal human, you're playing as someone with divine DNA, someone with abilities beyond human limits, someone who can interact with divine technology. Whether you understand Genesis 6 literally or spiritually, you are playing as someone whose lineage is defined by disobedience to God, and the game frames this as heroic. It's worth noting that the pagan documents of ancient Babylon held this exact opinion also. This is a complete inversion of the biblical narrative. In Scripture, those who violated God's boundaries, whether through angelic rebellion or covenant unfaithfulness, faced judgment. The flood came because of this corruption. The giants in Canaan were destroyed because they represented the persistence of rebellion against God's created order. But Assassin's Creed flips this completely. The hybrid bloodline, those who carry the legacy of disobedience, are the protagonists. They're the heroes fighting for humanity's freedom. They're the enlightened ones who can resist divine, Isu control. They're presented as humanity's only hope against tyranny. The game makes you identify with this lineage of rebellion, making you want to be part of it, making you see their nature as advantage, as evolution, as superiority. When you play as Ezio, you're inhabiting the identity of those who embrace disobedience, whether literal genetic corruption or spiritual apostasy, and the game makes this feel amazing. You have eagle vision, you can see what normal humans can't. You can activate ancient technology. You can access genetic memories. You're special. You're chosen. You're more than human. This is the seduction. You shall be as gods. Those who violated God's boundaries in Genesis 6 weren't accidentally creating a better humanity. Whether through angelic transgression or covenant breaking, they were attempting to create something that transcended God's design beings, that combined divine power with human reproduction, that could rule themselves, that didn't need God. And God judged them. Assassin's Creed presents this exact concept, a hybrid lineage with divine DNA fighting for autonomy from their creators, and frames it as humanity's salvation. The Animus makes this bloodline central to everything. The machine only works if you have Isu DNA. Normal humans can't use it. Only descendants of the hybrids, those who carry the legacy of disobedience, can access genetic memory, inherit their ancestors' skills and knowledge. This is bloodline mysticism, the belief that truth, power, and destiny are encoded in genetics, that certain lineages carry heritage that makes them superior to baseline humanity. This is what occult systems have always taught, that secret bloodlines descended from divine ancestors have the right to rule, that genetics determine spiritual destiny. Assassin's Creed gamifies this. It makes you part of the special bloodline. You're not just a random person, you're descended from legends, from those who defied the boundaries God established, from those who possessed what they shouldn't have, and the game never questions whether this is a curse rather than a blessing. It never suggests that maybe carrying this legacy is exactly what God judged. Instead, it makes the bloodline aspirational. Desmond spends the entire series learning to embrace his heritage, to activate his genetic potential, to become what his DNA supposedly destined him to be. You're being trained to desire this status, to see the violation of God's boundaries as evolution, not corruption. To view yourself as potentially more than human if only you had the right genetics, the right knowledge, the right connection to the ancient bloodline. This is transhumanism with ancient roots, the belief that humanity can and should transcend its God-given nature. Whether through genetics or technology, it's the same rebellion, refusing to accept the limits God placed on humanity and reaching for godhood. Let's talk about the assassin's motto, because it's not just a tagline, it's a complete worldview. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. The game presents this as philosophical sophistication. It means there are no objective truths, no universal morals, no inherent meaning. Therefore, every choice is equally valid. You are absolutely free because nothing is forbidden by nature or by God, only by human systems of control which you can reject. This is radical relativism married to radical autonomy, and it's presented as liberation. But think about what this actually means. If nothing is true, then there's no truth to set you free. If everything is permitted, then there's no such thing as justice, just power. If there are no objective moral standards, then the Templars aren't actually wrong. The Creed destroys its own foundation. But the game doesn't let you sit with that. It surrounds the Creed with heroic aesthetics, with beautiful cities, with epic music. It makes you feel like the Creed is true even while stating that nothing is true. This is sophisticated manipulation. The game is training you to adopt relativism intellectually while maintaining moral certainty emotionally. You don't believe in truth except when it comes to freedom, which you believe in absolutely. Notice the word creed. Not motto, not philosophy. Creed. A creed is a statement of religious faith. The Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed. These are formal declarations of what you believe about God, about reality, about salvation. The assassins have a creed, and by playing as them, by identifying with them, by adopting their worldview, you're taking on a religious framework. You're being initiated into a faith system that positions absolute personal autonomy as the highest good and any claim to objective truth as oppression. The game is making revolution your religion. And it's effective because it's experiential. You're not reading about the creed, you're living it. You're spending dozens of hours inhabiting the identity of someone for whom nothing is true, everything is permitted, is the foundational truth. The gameplay reinforces this. You can kill targets stealthily or openly. You can help civilians or ignore them. The game gives you freedom limited, programmed freedom within a deterministic system and tells you this is freedom. You're learning to confuse choice with freedom, and since every choice you make in the game works out, you're learning that autonomy leads to flourishing, that rejecting external authority is the path to power. This is catechizes. The game is forming you in a worldview. But here's the dark genius of Assassin's Creed. The game teaches you revolutionary consciousness. It shows you conspiracy, it trains you to distrust institutions, to see authority as corrupt, to recognize propaganda. It makes you feel like you're fighting the system. And then what? You finish the game, you put down the controller, and you boot up Assassin's Creed 2. You spend 40 hours fighting the Templars in Renaissance Italy. You feel like a revolutionary. You feel informed, awake, dangerous. You've learned to see the symbols, the eye of providence, the Templar cross, the conspiracy beneath the surface. And then you go back to your life buying products from corporations, scrolling social media owned by tech oligarchs, consuming media produced by entertainment conglomerates. Nothing changed. You didn't actually resist anything, you just got very good at simulated resistance. This is psychological inoculation. You've been exposed to revolutionary ideas in a safe, controlled environment. You've experienced fighting the power without any real-world risk. You've discharged your revolutionary impulse on pixels. So when you encounter actual injustice in the real world, you're desensitized. Yeah, I know. I played Assassin's Creed. The Templars run everything. What can you do? The game gives you the language of resistance while training you for passivity. You know the symbols now. You feel informed. But what do you do with that information? Mostly share memes, post on Reddit, watch YouTube videos, consume more content about conspiracy. You've been turned into a consumer of resistance, not a participant in it. And meanwhile, Ubisoft, a massive international corporation, profits enormously. You paid them for the privilege of feeling like a revolutionary. You bought the DLC. You pre-ordered the sequels. You're funding the very corporate structures you think you're resisting. This functions as controlled opposition at the entertainment level. Give people just enough truth to feel informed, rapid and satisfying gameplay, and ensure their revolutionary energy is exhausted on simulation rather than action. So, where does that leave us? It's this: true freedom is found in submission to Christ, not in autonomy from Him. The Assassin's Creed says, nothing is true, everything is permitted. Scripture says, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Assassin's Creed says freedom is the absence of constraint, the rejection of any authority outside yourself. Scripture says freedom is conformity to truth, alignment with reality as God designed it, and submission to the one who made you. This is why Jesus says his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Submitting to Christ isn't slavery, it's liberation from the slavery of sin, death, and self-worship. It's being healed and restored to become what you were always meant to be. The world says, break every chain, reject all authority, you are your own God, and you discover that autonomy is exhausting, that defining your own meaning is impossible, that you're enslaved to your passions, your pride, your fear of death. Christ says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Submission to Him isn't losing freedom, it's finding the freedom you were made for. The freedom to love without fear, the freedom to live without the crushing weight of self-creation, the freedom to trust that reality has meaning, that truth exists, that you're not alone in a meaningless void. This is why Gnosticism always fails. It promises enlightenment but delivers despair. It says you're divine but treats you like a slave to fate. It says you can be free from the demiurge but offers no actual path to flourishing. The Christian faith offers what Gnosticism can't: a God who isn't threatened by your questions, who invites you into relationship, who became human to rescue you, who trampled down death by death to defeat the powers that enslave you, and who's coming again to make all things new. The assassins fight the Templars fight the assassins, and both serve the same false god's power, control, autonomy. Neither offers actual freedom because neither acknowledges the Creator. The real revolution is Christians who actually believe the Bible and the Fathers and live like it's true. That's what the principalities fear: not your knowledge of their symbols, but your obedience to King Jesus. Stop feeding the machine that's discipling you away from Christ. Stop giving your time, your money, your attention to industries that are forming you in ancient pagan lies. Walk away, not because you're afraid, but because you have something infinitely better. This was the Frank Fox being frank about how popular culture, Hollywood, and the entertainment industry invert the truth of Scripture to lead people away from Jesus Christ. If you like this content, please subscribe, click like, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future uploads. And may God bless you in the knowledge of His Son, Jesus Christ.